The morning came in cold off the ridge, the way it always did in the last weeks of autumn, a thin light that found every gap in the workshop doors and laid pale bars across the floor. Do-jin stood at those doors with one hand on the frame, looking out at the yard where the frost had not yet lifted from the stones. 4 years. He had been counting them not in seasons, but in tolerances, the gap between what they could make and what they needed to make, closing by fractions so small they had to invent new language to name them. He turned back to the shop. 4 years to be able to make anything to a number, he said, to no one in particular, to all of them. All right, no more practice. Today we find out what it was all for. Seo-rin had laid the documentation out on the long table the night before, and it was still there, a landscape of sealed papers, folded drawings, grade records, and inspection stamps that covered every board from end to end. She stood beside it with her arms crossed, not looking at it. She had already looked at it enough. She was looking at Do-jin. Bearings, gears, shafts, frames, fasteners, every one to grade, every grade on paper, every paper sealed. Her voice was even, the way it always was when she was reciting something she had already decided. There is not a part of this machine's body that a daughter town shop couldn't make next year from these drawings without ever meeting us. That's done, Do-jin. That's finished and free. She let that sit for a moment. Which leaves your box, the empty one, the reason we drew all the others. He did not answer immediately. He was looking at the table, at the one space in the center of the documentation landscape where nothing had been filed, nothing sealed. A rectangle of bare wood in a field of paper. She was right. Everything else was done. Everything else was, in the most exact sense of the word, free. Free to leave this shop, free to travel by wagon and letter, an apprentice to any town in the realm that asked for it. The method was no longer his. It belonged to anyone who could read a drawing and hold a scraper. The empty box was the only thing left that was still only his. Cho Yeong was at the bearing line when Do-jin passed through, fitting a race to its journal with the particular unhurried attention she brought to everything now. She had been throwing stones into a river once. She did not look up when she spoke, but her voice carried across the shop the way voices do when they are meant to be heard. 3 towns this month. They want to learn the bearing line. Me. A quiet laugh, not quite disbelieving, not quite proud, something between the two that had no clean name. The thing they threw in a river as a baby. Towns are writing letters asking me to teach them. She set the race down and looked at it. I used to think being good at one thing was the whole of a life. Turns out the whole of a life is teaching it to 100 people so it can't ever be lost again. You taught me that, teacher, without ever once saying it. Do-jin had no answer for that either. He had learned, over 4 years, that some things were better received in silence. The forge was lit, and Pok-tae-ho was already at the steel. Not forging, just working it. The way a man tends a fire he has tended so long, it is less a task than a habit of breathing. He did not look up when Do-jin came to stand in the forge doorway. You're hovering, Do-jin, flat, not unkind. Go on, we've got the body. Whatever's in that head of yours about the heart, go and think it where you don't make my apprentices nervous. We'll be here making the thing run, while you dream up what runs it. Pyo Eun-ha was at the drafting board in the corner of the forge room, which was where she always was, curved lines growing under her chalk, in the unhurried way that meant she had already solved the problem, and was only now writing down the solution. She did not turn. He is not hovering, Taho. He is doing his actual work, which is to remember why, and then to ask the impossible next question. A pause. The chalk moved. Go ask it, Han-do-jin. We are ready for it now. He looked at the two of them, the forge master who had stopped needing him to explain heat, the geometer who had stopped needing him to explain tolerance, and felt something settle in his chest that he did not have a precise word for. Not pride, something quieter than pride, the recognition that a thing had been built correctly because it no longer required the builder. He went to find a place to think. He did not go far. He sat on the stone step outside the main workshop doors, in the cold that was slowly losing its edge as the sun climbed, and he thought about fire. Not the fire he wanted, the fire he could build. The engine he had been dreaming of since his first week in this world, the one that lit and killed itself 1,000 times a minute, that turned heat into rotation in a continuous roar, that engine was real. He knew it was real. He had grown up in a world full of them, had taken them apart and put them back together in his grandfather's shop, had understood their tolerances and their failure modes before he was old enough to drive one. He could see it clearly, the carburetor, the valves, the timing, the compression ratio, the cylinder walls that had to be bored to a 10,000. And that was exactly why he was not going to build it first. A fire you light and kill 1,000 times a minute will kill you a few times first if you leap at it. He had no illusions about that. The precision they had built over 4 years was real precision, honest precision, earned in blood and ruined castings and the slow accumulation of method, but it was not yet the precision of a running engine. Not yet. You did not earn the screaming heart by dreaming at it. You earned it the same way you earned everything else here, by building the patient version first, the honest version, the one that did not ask more of your craft than your craft could yet give. A fire that just burns steady underwater. Boil the water, trap the steam, let it push a piston, one push. The simplest heart there is. He went back inside. Pyo Eun-ha had not moved from the drafting board, but the chalk lines had multiplied. She was already drawing curves when he came to stand beside her. "Not the engine I'm dreaming of, Pyo," he said. "Not yet. That one's a fire you light and kill 1,000 times a minute, and it'll kill us a few times first if we leap at it. We build the honest one first, a fire that just burns, steady, underwater. Boil the water, trap the steam, let it shove a piston, one push, the simplest heart there is. We earn the screaming one by building the patient one, same as everything else here." She was already drawing curves. She had been drawing them before he finished speaking. A controlled push. She said it the way she said everything, not as a question, not as an affirmation, but as a fact she was in the process of verifying. "Oh, that I can figure. Pressure, area, the stroke. Give me the numbers and I will tell you exactly how hard your steam can shove before it bursts the vessel and kills your smiths." She looked at him over her shoulder, just briefly. "Do that part first this time, please. Before the funeral, not after." He gave her the numbers. She drew. He watched the curves appear and recognized in them the same logic he had been carrying in his head for 4 years, rendered now in someone else's hand, more cleanly than he could have rendered it himself. That was the other thing he had learned. What you teach does not stay the shape you gave it. It grows into the shape of the person who learned it. Pyo's curves were not his curves. They were better. The boiler took 3 weeks to rivet and proof. Paek-tae-ho oversaw every seam personally, and when the proof test came, cold water, twice the running pressure, in the yard with everyone standing well back, he did not flinch and he did not look away. "I learned that lesson in blood, with the cannon," he said afterward, when the vessel had held and the pressure had been released and the apprentices had come back from behind the woodpile. "We test it cold and far away before we trust it hot and close." No one argued with that. Mokje had the piston and cylinder. He had been working the fit for 2 weeks, scraping and measuring and scraping again, checking the clearance at 4 points around the bore, rotating the assembly by hand, and feeling for the places where the resistance changed. The standard Do-jin had given him was 4 10,000ths all the way round, a number that would have been a joke 4 years ago, a number that was now, if not easy, at least possible. Mok had stopped saying things were impossible sometime in the 3rd year. He had replaced the word with a question. What would it take? When the fit was done, he brought the assembly to the center of the shop and set it on the bench, and Do-jin watched him slide the piston into the bore with 2 fingers and feel it travel the full stroke without binding, without slop, with the particular smooth resistance of 2 surfaces that had been made to belong to each other. "Piston to cylinder, 4 10,000ths all the way round," Mok said. He was not quite smiling. He was doing the thing he did instead of smiling, which was to look at the work with an expression that contained everything a smile would have contained, more quietly. "Steam won't find a way past that." He fitted it again, feeling the travel. "Teacher, 4 years ago, you asked me to file 2 plates flat enough to ring together, and I thought you were mad. This is the same trick. It was always the same trick. Make 2 things fit so close that nothing can get between them. We just finally got good enough to do it to fire. They assembled the engine in the afternoon, the boiler on its brick bed, the cylinder mounted to its frame, the piston rod connected to the beam pivoted at its center, the pump rod hanging from the far end. It was small. It was, by any standard Do-jin could name from his old life, absurdly small and absurdly slow and absurdly simple. A single cylinder, a single stroke, a weight on a rope to return the beam after each push. It was the most complicated thing anyone in this world had ever built. They lit the fire under the boiler at the 3rd hour past noon. The water took time to heat. They waited in the way that people wait when they are not sure they believe what is about to happen, not impatiently, but with a careful stillness, as if movement might disturb something. Do-gwang sat on his stool by the door and watched the pressure gauge with the focused attention of a man who had learned, at some cost, to take pressure gauges seriously. The steam built. The gauge climbed. Mokjae stood closest to the cylinder, one hand near the valve, not touching it, just near it, and watched the pressure reach the mark Pyo had drawn on the gauge face in red chalk. He opened the valve. For a moment, nothing. The hiss of steam finding the cylinder, the faint groan of the beam shifting on its pivot, and then, "It's moving." Mok's voice came out as a whisper first, disbelieving, and then as something else entirely, as the beam rose and the weight on the rope lifted clear of the floor. "It's moving. The fire's pushing it. The fire is doing the work. Look, look, it lifted the stone. Nothing's touching it but steam." The stone hung in the air, a river-smooth stone they had set on the rope as a test weight, something with no significance except its mass, and it hung there in the lamplight of the workshop, suspended by nothing but the pressure of water turned to vapor by fire, and it was the most significant thing Do-jin had seen in 4 years. Cho Yeong had both hands over her mouth. She was watching the stone. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. "Fire, we made fire push." A long breath. "The water's gone, the veil's gone, the gods are gone, and we just made fire do the lifting. We're not going to need any of them. We're really not going to need any of them ever again." The stone swayed gently at the end of the rope. The beam descended, the exhaust valve opened, and the spent steam escaped in a long white breath, and then the valve closed again, and the steam built again, and the beam rose again, and the stone lifted again, and the rhythm of it, slow, patient, one stroke at a time, was the first heartbeat of a world that had decided to move itself. Seo-rin stood back from the assembly and looked at both of them, the drivetrain on its bench, every shaft and bearing and gear fitted and graded and documented, and the little engine on its brick bed, crude and slow and alive. "There's the body." She looked at the drivetrain. "And there's the heart." She looked at the engine. A pause. "Crude, slow, one stroke at a time, but it's the same heart, Do-jin. We just have to make it stronger and smoother and faster, the way we've made everything, by the number, one honest step at a time. They're going to be one machine, the thing that moves itself." Do-jin looked at the 2 assemblies, the body that could transmit force, the heart that could generate it, and felt the future of the thing with a clarity he had not felt before, not imagined, felt. The way you feel a tolerance when the gauge needle settles, and you know, not because you have calculated it, but because you have measured it, that the number is right. "The thing that moves itself," he said. "The whole reason I started, that first day at Bake's Forge with a cracked plowshare, and no idea how I'd gotten here, to build the one machine that means this frontier never has to depend on a dead god's roads again." He looked at the engine. The beam rose and fell. The stone lifted and descended. "We can see it from here now. For the first time, we can actually see it from here." Baek-tae-ho had found a cup from somewhere. He was not a man who made speeches, and what he said was not a speech. It was the kind of thing a man says when he has been holding it for 4 years and has finally found the right moment to set it down. "You remember the plowshare? The cracked one, the first day. I thought you were a madman or a spirit." A low laugh. the laugh of a man who has been wrong about something important and is not unhappy about it. 4 years, Do-jin. From a plow I could barely mend to a fire that lifts a stone by itself, and the gods we used to blame for the cracks are dead and gone, and we're still here, and we're still making. He looked at Do-jin with the direct, uncomplicated regard of a man who does not say things he does not mean. Whatever you are, Outlander, I'm glad the bad sky dropped you on my forge. Do-jin raised his cup to the body and the first beat of the heart, and to every one of you who got better at this than I ever was. He looked at them, Taeho with his cup, Seo-rin with her sealed papers, Cho Yeong with her hands still not quite steady, Mokjae with his eyes still on the engine, Pyo Eun-ha already back at her board, already drawing the next curve. That was always the plan. You just made it look easy. Later, when the others had gone and the fire under the boiler had been banked down to coals, Do-jin sat alone beside the little engine and listened to it breathe. One stroke, the beam rose. One stroke, the beam fell. The stone, still on its rope, swayed in the faint current of the exhaust. He put his hand on the cylinder casing and felt the warmth of it, the slight vibration of each stroke traveling through the iron into his palm. It was not the engine he had been dreaming of. It was not the thing that would put wheels on the road and make the frontier free. It was the honest first step, the patient heart, the buildable thing, the proof that fire could be made to work before you asked it to work faster. One stroke tonight, 1,000 a minute someday, and a road under wheels after that. He left his hand on the iron a moment longer, feeling the beat of it, steady and slow and entirely real. Rest up, little heart, he said quietly. We've got a world to build you into, and it's finally, only a matter of building it. The beam rose, the stone lifted, the exhaust breathed white into the cold air of the shop, and the lamp flame bent in the draft of it, and the night came down over Iron Ridge, with the veil thin and pale at the edges of the sky, and somewhere in the dark beyond the workshop doors, the frontier waited, patient as iron, for the thing that would move itself.